and welcome to the Gender Watch podcast brought to you by the Aya Institute for Women, Politics and Media. I am your host, Regina Bole-Bote, and I'll be sitting in for this exciting series where we dive deep into the gender dynamics that shape our political landscape in the lead up to the 2024 elections in Ghana. Now, this podcast is part of our larger Gender Watch initiative, an effort to monitor, track, and highlight the representation and participation of women in politics, media, and society. Throughout the series, we'll have thought-provoking discussions with leading experts and advocates who are working tirelessly to push for gender equity in all aspects of governance and leadership. Today's episode will unpack some of the deeper questions surrounding this issue. What are the barriers that prevent women from running for office? How do clientelism and cost of politics disproportionately affect women candidates? And why are appointed political roles, like cabinet positions, often seen as a more attractive alternative for women than standing for election to parliament? We'll explore the institutional gaps and examine how these issues contribute to a skewed political landscape, and more importantly, how addressing them can strengthen both democracy and national development. As we navigate this conversation, we'll also make the case for why more women in parliament is not just a matter of fairness or equality. So sit back, get comfortable, and join me on this journey as we explore how Ghana can overcome these barriers and institutional gaps, ensuring that our political landscape is as inclusive, representative, and as effective as it should be. I'm very excited to introduce our guest for today's episode. She is an associate professor of sociology at the University of Ghana. Her research interests focus on how global economic policies and practices reconfigure women's work in Ghana. She is currently one of the editors of the African Studies Review and Feminist Africa. She's a member of the International Sociological Association, the US-based African Studies Association, and the Ghana Studies Association. She's none other than Professor Akosua K. Darkwah. Thank you so much, Prof, for joining us. And I'm very happy to be here with you because I remember my days in level 200 as a sociology student, being taught by you.
Level 100.
Level 100, sociology, being taught by you. And when I saw that you were coming on the podcast, I was very excited because I was like, okay, fine. It's time to learn from the fountain. So welcome to our podcast.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So I have for the longest time really believed that if Ghana needed to show to the world that it was committed to gender equality and equity, one of the most important things was to ensure parity, or at least increase the representation of women in parliament. So the first thing I thought of when I saw your article, and it says, we would rather be leaders than parliamentarians. I was like, oh, really? Who wants to be a leader rather than parliamentarian? I mean, am I misunderstanding it? It was very intriguing, and I thought I needed to understand what went into deciding that after writing such a fantastic article, this is the title we want to give to our article. What influenced that choice of title?
Actually, it's a quote from one of the women.
Okay.
So I do qualitative work, and when you do qualitative work, you do the analysis from ground up, from the voices of the participants. You take that very seriously. So I didn't start out with that title. That paper is co-authored by
Professor Gretchen
Bauer at the University of Delaware and myself. And we decided on that title because when we were done, it summarized the sentiments of the rest of the participants. So we spoke to 20 people roughly. But one of them had said, I would rather be a leader than a parliamentarian. And they had reasons for why they were saying that, right? So it best summarized the content of the paper, which is why we used it.
Okay, That's very interesting. Now, this podcast has embedded in it a gender stats or gen stats segment where we look at data that's emanating from research. As a researcher yourself, talk to us about the current statistics or data when it comes to Ghana as far as women in parliament is concerned.
So we currently have 14.5% of women in parliament. These are statistics that have not changed much since Ghana's first parliament. They've hovered around 10% to 15%. They go up slightly in some years and then they come down, but basically we are under 15%, which is woefully inadequate if you compare it to other countries on the continent. Ghana is one of the first countries that had an affirmative action.
Exactly, and I was going to ask that because I thought it was paradoxical that in 1960s we had a quota for women, and many years later we're still talking about less than 15% representation in parliament.
So I think that it's important to also recognize that the system we choose for our elections around the world is not favorable to women, right? The best system to use is the proportional representation system. We have a first past the post system. And around the world, the figures for women's representation in systems like that are lower. So the thing that's paradoxical about Ghana is if you look at our traditional systems of governance, we have a fair understanding of the role of women in governance. But because we have an electoral system that came to us with its gendered component. So, for example, in other parts of the world, they had to fight for the right to vote as women. In Ghana, we take that for granted. We never had a conversation or a discussion about whether or not women can vote in elections. But in many other parts of the world, that had to be debated and discussed. In the US, black men, there had to be a discussion about whether if you're a black man, you deserve to vote. So when in Ghana, we all go to the polls in December, we take that for granted, that people had to make the case that citizenship, not your gender, not your race, determined whether you could vote or not vote, right? But the system, as we adopted it, had not embedded in it the understanding that women have a right to be voted for as well. So we have to struggle against that, just as in other parts of the world, they struggle against that. And in a sense, it sits uncomfortably with our other ways of doing business. You did talk about the fact that we have lots of women in law,
education.
In education, I mean, we can debate that, but yes, we've had women vice chancellors, right? Currently at the University of Ghana, we have a female vice chancellor and so on. And so when you compare, it seems, it doesn't seem to match or make sense,
We'll talk about those peculiar conditions, but you've mentioned in our traditional setting and how women are very much involved. And then you compare that to the national level where, because of the system we've adopted, we're not seeing so much involvement of women. But when people talk about the underrepresentation, they point to social and cultural factors and say that these factors are hindering the ability of women to participate. Is that a session you share and
so
you agree?
You see, even when we take our traditional setting, for example, it's true that women are present. But when you look at the kinds of issues they discuss or debate, that's where you begin to see that there is a difference. So Professor Tejwami has a fantastic article from the mid-1980s about the Asante Himer's court. So the fact that the Asante Hime has a court and the Asante Hime has a court suggests there are
some level of equality.
Exactly. But when you start to look at what cases go before them, that's when you see the difference, right? That's when you see that we may think that they both have rights to lead. But on the issues that we consider important, we leave that to the men. So it's important to keep that in mind, even with our traditional system. One of the things that our research has shown is that when women do stand, they actually do get voted for. in the proportions to which they stand. In other words, it is not truth based on Ghanaian data to say that Ghanaians won't vote for women. Okay. In the proportions in which women stand, they get voted for. But because the numbers standing are lower generally, then we end up with a lower final amount or numbers. So what we need is for more women to stand. And that's where the real
challenge is. So let's talk about that one. Why don't we have more women standing?
Okay, so Gretchen and I have, at this point, we have a 5th paper coming out soon. Okay. And we've been doing this work for the last decade. So she comes at it from a political science perspective, I come at it from a sociological perspective. And we basically make 2 arguments. One is what we call the cost of politics, and the second one is what we call the politics of insults. Okay. Now, on the cost of politics, the point is that elections in Ghana are very expensive. When we did the data collection for the paper you are talking about, which was published in 2020, the data collection was done in 2015, leading up to the 2016 elections. And it became very clear that elections in Ghana were very expensive. At that time, the figures range from a minimum of $38,000 to a maximum of $100,000.
To successfully be a parliamentarian?
Yes, among the group of people we spoke to. Okay. There's work that shows that if you look at the costs of running for an election in Ghana, it increases by about 60% each cycle. Okay. So even if you basically you have to take those figures, 38,000, add 50%, that will put you at almost 60. Add another 50, and basically it's going to cost a minimum of around $90,000 to stand for an election. And it's because we require all kinds of things. So you'll notice that in an election year, there are lots of T-shirts produced. Right? You have to buy the T-shirts, you have to take it to a printer to imprint it. Then you make posters. You have to get a graphic designer to make the poster. And then you have to make the posters. You have to give somebody transportation money to go around town to go and post them in different places. Then every time you call a meeting, you have to give people transportation money. You need a canopy, you need the chairs, you have to give them drinks, and you have to give them food. And we don't want peanuts and bananas. We want jollof rice and chicken for each, right? We, as Ghanaians say, take away. We want takeaways. Takeaways cost money. So just the logistics cost money. But then it's also that citizens literally exact their pound of flesh from those standing during an election year. So if my child needs school fees, you will provide it. If somebody is sick, you will provide it. If I'm getting married, you will provide it. If I have a funeral, you will provide it. I even have a case of a woman who said somebody named their child after her. Okay. So that will be a cost that goes way beyond the election, because if a child is named after you, it means that for the next 70 years, is it just for me? When that child is getting married at 30, you'll be 70. You'll be expected to go to the wedding and you have to buy a gift and all of that sort of thing, right? And if you can't afford it, somebody in your house has to take on that responsibility. So we basically have costs that we impose on the electorate. Now that's imposed on both men and women.
So how do the
men navigate gender it? Dynamic of it is that women have less money than men.
Okay.
So Professor Abunodru of the Department of Economics and her colleagues in 2011 published a paper, a study where they had looked at assets in Ghana. And they concluded that Ghanaian women own 30% of their gross wealth in this country, right? So when you stand as a man for an election, on average, you come with less money than the men do. Both the men and the women will go and solicit for funds. As a woman, when you go and solicit for funds from men in Ghana, they use it as an opportunity to want to extract sexual favors from you. Some of them don't, others will. However, whether people expect it from you or not, the electorate have a certain sense that you have.
are.
So you get tagged, true or false, as having given sexual favors in exchange for money. In the majority of cases, that's not true, but that is what will be said about you. I have spoken with women who said in their communities there was a rumor that they were sleeping with the chief. They had to actually get the chief and his wife to go on air to say this is not true. And all kinds of things. We caught them, we caught you having sex with somebody in a bathroom, in some toilet, all manner of stories get made up. So if you don't have thick skin, not just you, but really, if your family members don't have thick skin, if your partner doesn't have thick skin, if you have children in school who get teased, you have to think about all of that. And whether or not you want to put not just yourself, but all these other people through really needless accusations and rumor mongering, which takes away time and energy from what you need to actually spend your time and energy on.
Okay. So just as a follow-up, in answering and listing what goes into campaigning or the elements of the cost, you've talked about how citizens use that as an opportunity to more or less exact and get their share. Is that as a result of how these political parties have governed when they've had the opportunity to lead the country? So citizens are not getting the dividend of democracy as they should, and so then they use the only opportunity, which is elections, to get what is rightfully due them or what should ordinarily be due them.
Okay, so you are asking me what we would call, let me not use jargon. As we sit here, we've gone, this is for our fourth republic, this is the 32nd year. Okay. So we've had 8 elections. What do we understand as democracy, one? What do we understand the role of a member of parliament to be? Members of parliament are supposed to make law. They are legislators. They make laws. They have oversight role. The function of a member of parliament is not to build roads directly or to put classrooms, right? But Stefan Lindbergh talks about, on our continent in Ghana, having a 5th function for MPs. Okay. This 5th function is, we want to see you give us dividends directly. Okay. So if you ask me that, is that because they haven't done what they are supposed to do? It's difficult for me to answer and say yes or no. What is clear is that on our soil, we have added a 5th function to what a member of parliament is supposed to do. Is that because the members of parliament haven't done what they are supposed to do well? I'm not sure how to answer that, because what members of parliament are supposed to do is to put in place the legislature, ensure oversight, do as we want so that we can in turn get the dividends we want. Democracy is not just about elections. I think that in our part of the world, we seem to think that
equating democracy.
What a democracy means is that every 4 years we'll go and vote. We don't hold the leaders to account. If you try and hold leaders to account, you are seen as being rude and disrespectful, right? People talk about our leaders as our fathers. The way I see it, I have a father. I have only one father, right? Secondly, leaders in our context are supposed to do that which makes them respected, right? You earn respect. You don't demand respect. Okay. But in our context, we operate, and it's not actually just the leaders. We, the followers, also operate on the understanding that the elders are not supposed to be questioned.
They're always right.
They are always right. So in a sense, it's a field day. If you are in charge, you don't have to necessarily do what you have to do because you are not likely to get pushback. When you do get pushback, others amongst you will rein those who are pushing back in, so that at the end of the day, we actually forget that All of us are supposed to be ensuring that the right thing gets done. You will get in trouble for demanding that the right thing gets done, right? So if we have, a lot of time people talk about leaders, but we forget that it's also about the followers, right? There's a saying that we get the leaders we deserve.
Okay.
And it speaks to the fact that the kind of expectations you have of the leaders and the kinds of demands you make of your leaders determines what kind of a leader you will get. If this person knows that, if I pull this tomorrow, they'll be all over town with my name, they won't. But if they know that I will get away with it, that whoever comes to speak out up against my behavior will get shut down, then there's less responsibility on you as a leader, right? And really, that's what we do. If you think about how we talk about Ghana as a democracy, we focus very much on the elections, as if that's the only marker of a democratic state. But that isn't. And until, as citizens, we understand that our roles as citizens extend beyond every 4th, 7th December going to vote, then we are not truly running a democratic country. It's at minimum you vote, but that's the first step. There are many other things. You have rights, you have responsibilities as citizens that go beyond
just voting.
And we don't do very well on the other aspects. We don't have a good understanding of accountability, demanding accountability of our leaders, holding our leaders to account, right? So if you make us election promises, you have to show us that you have actually done what you said you would do. We should have a system where you should have a sense that if I go to a primary school for speech and prize giving day, I can be asked by the class 6 student, Mr. President, you said blah, 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 but, and you would have to answer. That you don't just get that from journalists at a press conference where you know they're going to ask you about this question. That when we say you have evidence for something, we fact check it. If you say to us that our rivers are clean, it's fact checked. The scientists can say, yes, here's the standard measure of clean rivers. And in Ghana, 82.7% of our waters are clean. Then we have the evidence to back what it is. But when we have a situation where, I look at the glass as half full, another person looks at it as half empty, rather than saying this is 50%. Are we happy with 50%? Or we want to be able to say 90% of our children go to school.
Okay.
But if we are happy with 50% and you are going to tell me, so I've heard somebody say, well, if there are no lights, at least we have the street lights. So that's halfway. Right? Having the street lights without light is better than not having the street lights at all.
We've come to accept the minimum.
So if we are happy with street lights that don't work, then why should a leader bother to give you a street light that works? And if the person who lives on that street without the lights is quite happy because the street lights exist without their lights, then why should you give them more than what they want? Right? So I think it's important in this conversation to also think about the extent to which we as citizens, as followers, have not done our part in ensuring that the leaders do what is expected of them.
Okay, so back to the issue of the cost of politics. And we've toyed around as a country, we've toyed around with the idea of state funding of political parties. Could that be a solution?
Okay, but you know that this is a domestic debt restructuring state. So,
Yes.
As we sit here right now,
I mean, in an
ideal world, what should happen is that there should be transparency in who's funding what. So you should be able to see that the PPP has 27,000 cities. 15,000 came from Asumesi, 12,000 came from this other person, and that's what adds up to it. And when they are asked to produce the numbers and who gave them the monies, it should be available for us to do that, right? We should all as citizens be able to pay into a fund that we want to support. So if you say that you are a CPP diehard, it's not just by saying that or by voting for them on the day of the election. To what extent are you doing campaigns? I mean, in other parts of the world, average citizens do campaigns. Campaigns are not for the political parties and the leaders only. People do door-to-door campaigns where you go door-to-door and say, I am a believer in this party for A, B, C, and D reasons. So I encourage you to support them. And you do it using your own time and your own money. You don't do it because the politician, the MP, has given you money to do it, which is where we are at now. If I'm going to go door to door to do a campaign, somebody better give me money to do it. Otherwise, I'm not doing it.
Yeah, but that's because ordinarily on a day-to-day basis, you are even finding it difficult to meet your basic needs.
All of us find it difficult to meet our basic needs.
Yes.
But on Sunday, I don't think that on Sunday when we go to church, we all refuse to put money in the bin, because some people even go to church on an empty stomach and put their money in, right? And you can say, well, because they have a hope that will generate something for them. But you are the one who claims that you belong to this party. It's different if you are not somebody who claims to be one party fan or the other. But if you claim to be a quote-unquote foot soldier, that means you are invested. It can't be that this is a job that you do every 4 years, for which you get paid. But what we've done is we've created a system where being a foot soldier is somebody's job for which they get paid because they are unemployed. I mean, one of the things that we did find when we did the study in terms of who's expecting money is that when, so there were very few people who were involved in the party delegates, being the delegates who were, say, professionals, right? But in the one case that I interviewed, the one person I interviewed who was a health professional, she made it very clear that nobody had tried to give her money, right?
Okay.
And it's possibly because they knew that she would be offended. Right. So what that speaks to is that we've created the system of payments, but it isn't that everybody is expecting to be paid for doing the work that they choose to do. What we have done is created a system of payment around the elections. So take when the NDC decided, all right, the way we are going to resolve these payments is we are going to expand the delegates, right? If we make the numbers too large, then even if you want to buy everybody a t-shirt, you can't because there are just too many of them.
Yeah.
It didn't work. They just made their cost more. Because if you had that 60 delegates expecting t-shirts, the 600 delegates also wanted t-shirts, right? And while on the one hand you can say, well, people are hungry, I mean, are we trying to say that Ghanaians have no shame? So you sell your soul for one t-shirt, one. It's not even a designer t-shirt, right? This is not an Armani t-shirt. This is not a t-shirt that after 10 washes will still be looking nice and clean. It will be all distorted. And you are willing to sell your soul for a t-shirt. If I gave you 5 kilograms of rice, 5 kilograms of rice, even if you are one person eating that 5 kilograms of rice, it will be done before the next 4 years. So how much does it cost to buy your conscience as citizens, right? So I can understand that, and especially this time around, Ghana is hard. We all understand that.
Yeah.
But does that mean that we've lost all our values?
Okay.
We don't have a moral conscience anymore? At which point do we say that we are so poor that it doesn't matter how little we are paid? We are willing, right? We have to move away from the monetization of politics. There has to be other ways by which political parties are funded. And we as the citizens have to demand other things
Other than
t-shirts
bread and butter
for an election, right? There's the saying about rather than give me fish, teach me how to fish. So rather than be willing to take a t-shirt and then go hungry for the next 4 years. You say you want to be MP. Come and tell us over the next 4 years what kinds of laws you are going to be working on passing. Given that Ghana is a low-income country in a particular kind of global economy, how are you going to set us up differently so that we can make more money as a state and that extra income then gets shared equally amongst us? Let's have some difficult conversations, right? And not he's the MP every time. And then we have so much respect for when they're coming, we are running around like we've seen Jesus. If you set yourself up like that, you are not going to be able to demand anything meaningful from them. When they come, you should sit calmly and let them show up. And then ask them some hard questions and let them answer it. But if just the mere sight of them, you are about to fall over in sheer glee, then 2 CDs is good enough for you because that's all it takes, really.
Okay, in your research, how much of the politics of insult, or how much impact did the prevalence of politics of insult have on women and their willingness to, contest for these seats?
Okay, so politics of insult is, again, a quote from one of the participants, right?
Okay.
And it's a lot of it. So you notice, for example, this even happens when people are being vetted, parliamentarians, leaders of different sorts. A man will not be asked, how many side chicks do you have? How many children have you got outside of your marriage? Some of the children they have, they don't even know that they have them. It's the women they have their children with who know that they have them.
Okay.
Those questions are off the table. But if you're a woman, are you married is the question number one. Being married is not good enough. You also have to have children. That's not good enough. Then we have to talk about your hair. So for some of the parliamentarians, I think Ghana has moved a long way from that, although we can debate that, right? If you have natural hair, it's an issue. So if you had natural hair, if you had cut your hair in anything that didn't look like a secondary school bus, you were in trouble. So we have all these, the length of your skirt, the size of, everything is on the cards if you're a woman. In terms of, one woman told me how she had to cross a river. And she would have to wear the trousers to be able to jump into the boat. But if she goes to the village in the trousers, she'll be in trouble. So you have to put your skirt in the bag. If the skirt is also crumpled, you're in trouble. Because they say when you walk around, you don't wear, if you can't even iron your skirt, how can you be? So you've lost the game either way.
Okay, even before it starts.
Even before it starts, right? And this is emotional violence, really. Okay. Because this is not, you can't go and say they beat me up because they haven't actually beaten you up physically, but they are getting at you psychologically, right? And again, they are getting at you, but the rumors and the talk is also being heard by your family members. It's being heard by the children in your family and so on and so forth. So it goes beyond you. Did it deter people? Yes and no. There were people who said they can insult me 150 million times. I will still stand. And there were others who said it's enough. I've heard this is just too much.
And you made reference to even family members
putting pressure on you. Yeah. And you can understand that. I have a father. If I go and say the wrong thing anywhere, I have to go and answer because you've disgraced not just you, you've disgraced everybody. Okay. Right? If you go and lie in public, he will ask you questions. If you go and steal, he will ask you questions. So if they are saying that you're a thief and he knows that you are not a thief, it is tarnishing the image of the family. He's going to be saying, why are you doing this? Why are you allowing them to drag our name in the mud, right? So it goes beyond you, really, and you have to make a decision. Kids, if you have children and they go to school and they come back and they are in tears, and what's your problem? Mommy, they said you're an ashawo. First time you might let it slide, you might talk to him but you look in the mirror, I'm not, and all of that. By the time it's happened 5 times, you're thinking this is not worth it.
Professor Akosua Dakwa is an associate professor of sociology at the University of Ghana. This is the Gender Watch podcast, and today we're discussing women and the political sphere, institutional gaps, and making a business and democratic case for inclusion. We've been speaking to some people on the streets about their views on this particular subject. Let's have a listen to them.
Okay, I think that women in Ghana should be encouraged to take up more leadership roles in the country. This is because um, right from JHS, SHS to uni, we have the mindset that women cannot lead very well in institutions and things. So we have to change our mindset about these things. Taking the first SLC president in tech, she goes by the name Yvonne Osei Ado. She's the first woman or lady to take up this SLC president role in the school. So I believe that more women should look up to women, or the younger generations should look up to women who are ahead, women who are taking up these roles, so that they can be encouraged, so that in the next generations to come, we have more women taking up more roles in the country. The government and political parties should enforce the law on the people and put it behind their brains that women are capable and strong enough to stand for positions in order to build their self-confidence, and they should put someone on the position to set an example for that.
So if there can be a law that can empower the women, because when you look at our parliament, we out of that 275 seats, not even 20 are women. So these are some of the things. Yes. So,
Oh no, no, there are not a lot of women in those positions because men, greater portion of men think that they belong to the kitchen, which is not true. So then I encourage women to come out, and if they have the talent or the necessary education, like they have the required education that they all have, they can seek for those positions which they can equally get, which both men and women vote for them, which is also good. Yeah.
every human being, whether be it man or woman, has equal rights to be voted for, to be in power. It's a matter of choice, like I always say. Some of the men, like our husbands, they don't feel comfortable seeing their women going into politics. That could be an hindrance one way or the other, because they would look like, they'll say like, oh, where are you leaving the children from? You're supposed to be a housewife. Who will take care of the children when they come back from school? Who will do school runs? Who will prepare their meals and all that? But forgetting that every woman is not supposed to be the same. We have career women that are doing very well in politics, in the academics, in the medical field. You just name them. They're doing marvelously well.
I think people tend to respect more men in power, or more men in higher positions than women. So actually, they don't really value the opinion of women in power. So then it kind of make other women to not motivated or not encouraged. If you look at the Ghanaian setting, most of the time men are the ones encouraged to do things, not women. If you're a woman and you try to do something or speak up and be upfront about something, they kind of term it as maybe you want to be a man, or you are in a competition with a man. Yes. So they kind of sit down and look down on women in that aspect. Yes.
No, I don't think so. There are few, because the ladies, like I said, they don't take our opinions important. They think maybe we are ladies, so our opinions are no matters. Men are men, so I think that's the reason why there are not many in the parliament here. We should take our education very high. Then the ladies should come together. The more idea that we two can do better than a man. Because if a man can do, man too can do better. Maybe they should also hear our opinions. Yeah, they should let her speak so they can hear what we can do. I think they should try us what women too can do. Yeah, I think.
Me seeing a woman in a higher position, it empowers me to work harder, and also I think she being a woman and in a higher position, she will understand the people's needs better, yeah, than the men.
Right. So, Prof, now let's talk about in your article. I did see a section on weak legislatures. Is it a product? Is that one of the reasons we're not seeing so many women in parliament?
No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, the thing is that the argument we were making there is that the women do not think that the work of parliamentarians gets done in the ways in which it should be done, which is why they are not interested, right? So if I'm going to get insulted and I'm going to have to use a lot of money, and when I get into parliament, I'm not actually going to do what I know I should be doing as a parliamentarian.
Then is it really worth it?
Then is it worth it? Right? Which is why they said they would rather be leaders. So if you put me in the position of CEO of a public utilities company, or you say I should go and head DVLA or whatever, I don't have to go and spend money. I don't have to be insulted in the process. You give me this job. And I go and I sit and I say to myself, okay, by the time I leave the DVLA in 5 years, I want to have done A, B, C, D, and E. And then I go out and I do it. At the end of my tenure, I can look back and say I have accomplished so much. But when you're an MP, have we even asked MPs to come and account to us for, okay, you've been an MP for 12 years, come and tell us over that 12-year period how you debated this point in Parliament.
I think
why you made the case for why Ghana should sign or not sign on to something. To what extent did you listen to the citizens before you signed on to us doing A, B? Do you hear us having conversations like that? No.
I think it goes to reinforce the point you've made earlier that we've added another function for MPs, and that seems to be the most important function in our eyes compared to all the other functions that a parliamentarian should have. And you're saying, do we hold them accountable? Probably the only way we hold them accountable, or people understand, is through the thumb. And that is why elections perhaps are prioritized over all other aspects of democracy. But speaking about the legislature, and I'm going to borrow the words of the Speaker of Parliament, Alban Bagbin, who has been very hard on the parliamentarians, saying that they have that the ills of democracy as we have it now is because Parliament itself is weak, And on the night when the affirmative action bill was passed, he did say that he's even afraid that the next parliament would have fewer women. And he points to the political parties and their primaries are not being able to elect more women as parliamentary candidates. How have the political parties, since the advent of multi-party democracy?
So there's a lot of work globally, actually, about what role can political parties play in ensuring that we have the right numbers of women in politics. We haven't quite had that conversation here to the same level of rigor that you'd expect us to have. The men want, so when an affirmative action case has been made for politics, the men have said, no, it's not fair.
Yeah.
Right? And women have said, if you do affirmative action, then it means we didn't
earn it.
We didn't earn it. But the men haven't been earning it either. Right? I mean, if you have a grandfather, or if you use old boys networks and you get in, right, then to what extent is a woman any different from you who didn't earn it but was in the right place at the right time on the basis of your gender? But we haven't quite had those conversations. I mean, when you think about when we have elections and there's in the early periods, right, in January, the president is going to be doing a lot of electing of different people for different positions and so on. You hear a lot of conversations about, so we'd like to talk about regional balance.
Yes.
That's always a very big part of the conversation, right? We don't talk about gender balance in the same vigor. So in our context, regional balance seems to be more important to us than a gender balance. And now that we've created 16 regions and not 10, then there's more of a need for balancing on that. Right? So we are happy with 30% of women if we get it, right? And that seems to be a fair concession. But we are not saying let's have 50% of women, even though we make up 50%.
There was a time when one manifesto, one political party manifesto said they were going to appoint a certain number of women in cabinet. That didn't happen, but nobody held them to account.
So my general response with that is, why is it the CSO's responsibility?
Okay.
Why isn't it the journalist's responsibility? Why isn't it the teacher's responsibility? Why isn't it an average Ghanaian's responsibility? When they make the promises, they don't make it to just the CSOs. They make it to the people of Ghana. And if they know that the only person who's going to be calling them out is the CSO, then they're off the hook, really, right? If they are going to a meeting that the CSO has organized, or if they're invited into a space where they know the CSO will be present, then they make sure their ducks are lined up in a row. But other than that, they are off the hook. So my attitude is, we need to get to the point where the citizens, all of us, are taking our role, our duty, our responsibility as citizens fully, seriously. And we are all demanding of our leaders that they do what is expected of them. That as citizens, we have a social contract with them. And they are supposed to be doing it. It's not a favor. When the right thing is done for you as a citizen of Ghana, no leader is doing you a favor. No leader is being nice to you. It is their job. That's why they are there. If they can't do it, if they won't do it, then somebody else who can and will should be put in place. But we cannot have a paternalistic kind of approach and attitude where we behave as if the leaders are doing us a favor and they are nice to us, and therefore whatever crumbs they give us, we should be all very satisfied and happy. As if they didn't have to do it. They are supposed to be doing these things and more.
We'll be wrapping up in a bit, but before I ask you about making a case for inclusion in democracy, talk to us about the gendered implication of clientelism in Ghana's political system. So, and that comes up strongly in that article, clientelism, the cost of politics, and then the politics of insult. How does it impact our political system?
So I'll use the concepts of representation to sort of wrap up and answer these questions, right? Why is it important that we have women in politics? There are many responses to that. One is that a democracy, the leaders in a democracy are supposed to reflect the socio-demographics of the population they are representing, right? So we cannot have a situation where the leaders look fundamentally different from the people that they are leading, which is why we talk about regional balance, right? And we have an unspoken understanding that even in terms of religion, we should have some balance there, right? The population and the leadership, they should sort of be mirror reflections of each other. When you are young as a girl and you see women in leadership positions, it tells you that this is something that you can do too. In our context, we don't pay too much attention to this. So I'll give you a very basic example. When people are buying toys for their kids, dolls for girls, they don't think about, if my child is a black human, maybe I shouldn't give her a white doll. Because what are you telling her subconsciously every time she plays with that doll? Right? Similarly, if I'm going to look at pictures of doctors, lawyers, engineers, parliamentarians, and they are all men, subconsciously are telling me this is not
belong in that space.
A space for me. Right? So the symbolic representation of that is important. But there's also the substantive. The fact that, and we see this in many different countries, that when you have not tokenism. So tokenism is when we go and sprinkle some few women in there to brighten up the place, right? When you have the numbers that can organize and make a case for something, you begin to see that the kinds of laws that get passed in those environments shift, change. And that's the most important reason why we need women in politics. We need people who will bring a different kind of leadership style, who will have a different set of requirements and standards for what gets done in Parliament.
Okay.
To shape the outcomes that we want in Parliament.
Okay, so if I get you right, the descriptive is important as well as the substantive. But without the descriptive, it will be difficult to get that substantive representation.
Yes.
Okay. In wrapping up, let's talk about, and you've just touched on it briefly, but making a case for, making a business and democratic case for inclusion. I remember when Barack Obama came to Kenya in 2015, where he was talking about how if a football team leaves out half the team from the pitch, there's no way that they would win the match. So there's clearly a need. How can our institutions, do we need reorientation, for instance, to understand that leaving out women hurts us in the long run? And how can we change that notion?
So I'll give you a better quote to use next time from an African based on the continent.
Okay.
Because, well, Barack Obama, so far as Ghanaians or Africans are concerned, he's not actually African, but we like him to be African when it suits us.
Okay.
So Thomas Sankara had a quote about women holding up half the sky.
Okay.
Right. And there are many ways to think about that, to think about the ways in which if you deny half the population, their skills, their interests, their perspectives get lost on us, right? But for me, so that's sort of like making the business case that if we put the women in there, we will see the dividends in future. I like to make the case that we say we're a democracy. It's for us, by us.
Okay.
It's not for us, by some people, right? So for me, it's the symbolic part of it. We are 50% of the population. We should be represented by 50% of us, right? The dividends will follow.
Okay.
But for me, we are not doing it for the dividends. We are not saying the reason why. It's our right as citizens to be voted for, to be able to vote and to be voted for. Yes, it will also provide dividends in the future. But as a citizen of a supposed democratic state, I should be able to stand for an election without being insulted, without my marital status being questioned, without needing to prove that I have produced sons and daughters before I stand for an election.
All right. Thank you very much, Prof. Is there any concluding remark you'd like to make as we wrap up?
Well, probably one about both citizens being mindful that they are not just followers, but that the kind of followers they are determines the kind of leaders
we get. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your time. Professor Akosua Dakwa is an associate professor at of sociology, rather. She is an associate professor of sociology at the University of Ghana, and we've been talking to her today about women and the political sphere, institutional gaps, making a business and democratic case for inclusion. It's the Gender Watch podcast, and we are exploring how gender is shaping our political landscape as we prepare for elections 2024. Catch us for another episode of this exciting podcast. I'm Regina Boliboti. Thank you so much for being with us.